All right. Hello, hello, welcome. This is Shivani, the dietitian, and I am so excited today to have Alicia, who is a personal trainer and who is also a sports dietitian, as a guest, and she will be answering a lot of questions today. Well, I am your host today, and I will be asking her a bunch of questions related to your blood sugars and exercise. When we think about food, think about blood sugars, we always think about food, and we think that only food is the only thing that affects the blood sugar. So today we are going to have a twist, and we are going to be talking about exercise and blood sugars. So help me welcome Alicia. Hi, Alicia.
Hello, Shivani. Thank you so much for having me. So, as you mentioned, I'm a personal trainer and sports dietitian. I've been actually a personal trainer for, oh my gosh, 14 years now. I started with a more strength focus in my kind of like personal training. I was focusing a lot on like more body composition when I got into personal training. And then I've learned over time about longevity training just to feel better, have less aches and pains. And then from like a health perspective as too. And then now on my own endeavors, I'm focusing a little bit more on triathlons. I recently did my own Olympic triathlon where I actually learned a lot about blood glucose management through going through my training, because that type of training is a lot of low blood sugar management for sure. So I'm excited to be here today because I agree. Like a lot of people, we know food really affects blood glucose from a good and from a bad perspective, but we don't often talk about the role of movement with all of it.
Mhm.
And I would argue that that plays a big piece of the puzzle that a lot of people are underutilizing when they're trying to learn how to manage their blood glucose levels.
Absolutely, Alicia. And you have been a great trainer for our WOW program that we had running for last year, few years. And now you will be the coach for our Metabolism Marathon program. And I'm so excited about it because this is a piece of the puzzle that everybody miss. So first, moving forward, first tell me, why is movement one of the fastest ways to lower blood sugar? I know you mentioned you had a low blood sugar because you're training for triathlon and everything. Now here we are talking about people who usually have higher blood sugar. So why is
Mm-hmm.
movement so important?
Yeah, so movement is one of the fastest ways to bring blood sugar down because your muscles act like a sponge. So when you think about it, when your muscles contracting, whether you're walking, you're exercising, you're lifting, you're doing intervals, what actually happens is your muscles pull glucose out of the bloodstream and use it for energy. And this is actually an independent process from insulin. That means that even if your insulin isn't necessarily working efficiently or you don't necessarily have sufficient insulin in the bloodstream for some cases, exercise does actually the jobs of like clearing the sugar from the bloodstream. Over time, also, as you're exercising and you build muscle, you kind of think about like, hey, our sponge is going to get bigger. We also see a lot of improvements in insulin sensitivity with exercise too, meaning that your body becomes more responsive and you actually need less insulin to manage our blood glucose levels because we're moving a lot more.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. So a lot of time, for our audience, when we talk about insulin, we are thinking of insulin that is released by your pancreas, and it is like a key that unlocks the doors of the cells for the glucose to come inside the cell. So it can be utilized by the cells. And when exactly what you're talking about sponge, and we are talking about the glycogen stores, right, that we
Yeah,
have
yeah,
in
yeah.
the muscle. So that's a scientific term for that, that whatever excess glucose you have, it will be stored as glycogen. And
Mm-hmm.
exactly what she is saying, that it acts like a sponge. So more muscle you have, it means more space you have to store the glycogen stores, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
more you can utilize later.
Yeah, yeah. And over time, this makes it easier to kind of manage your blood glucose and it reduces the strain on the pancreas too. Because if you think about it, for some
Uh-huh.
individuals, their blood glucose is high, their body's trying to pump so much insulin into their body. Maybe they're not responding, or their pancreas is starting to get to a point where it's not able to produce as much. And so it is a big stress in the body. And we're reducing that stress by having that movement.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So now there are different types of movement. So like some people like to walk, some people like to do strength training, resistance training, hit training, interval or Tabata kind. So like is there a different kind of effect of a like different kind of exercise like what you do Will that
Mhm.
affect how your blood glucose behave or how much you burn? So what
Yeah.
kind of exercise help with that?
Yeah, and I think it's really important to explain how different exercise responds because I think a lot
Mm-hmm.
of us we assume okay, exercise is exercise. Our body's going to respond the same, but then with the metabolism marathon, people are going to be wearing CGMs, and I don't want people to freak out by seeing the response with the CGMs. So starting with kind of the most basic and the most accessible form of movement, which is walking. And that's one of the actually most powerful tool. So even a
Mm-hmm.
short 10-15 minute walk after eating can flatten the curve. And you can see that difference on your CGM by getting the movement in after you eat. So instead of
Mm-hmm.
seeing like that spike and then like that spike after a meal and then the very, very slow decline, what you'll see is a little bit more of a gentle increase by getting that movement in. And then your blood sugars will come down a lot faster with that walking. And it doesn't really, you don't need equipment. You need a pair of running shoes or just a pair of shoes in general that are comfortable just to get outside. When we talk about strength training, so we tend to see a little bit more of a stable CGM trend with strength training. You might see a small dip during the workout and then it might stabilize. But the long term benefit, we've already talked about this. The more muscle we have, the more storage tank we have for the glucose as glycogen. And then we also have the increased sensitivity. So when we look at like the benefits from resistance training of like, yeah, during it, we might see that small dip in comparison to walking where we might see a larger dip or cardiovascular, we might see a larger dip. However, we want to look at the longer term trend and even like the 24 or 48-hour window after you do resistance training, you might actually see an improved trend with your blood glucose levels. And then HIIT training or interval training, which I know I've talked a little bit about with the WOW program. So doing the short bursts of intensity and then relaxing, it creates a little bit more of a roller coaster of blood sugars. And I think I know we've talked about this with your blood
Yes.
glucose because we did a HIIT workout and you're like, my blood glucose actually rise and then it
Yeah.
came down. And so even if it's in a fasted state, you might actually see like a little bit of a glucose response because you have a little bit more of the stress hormones released. And it's not necessarily a bad thing to have the stress hormones released. It's just with intense exercise, that's what we see. And so with that intense exercise, actually our liver will dump a little bit of the glucose into our bloodstream for a quick
Mm-hmm.
energy source in that intensity. And it's not a bad thing. It's just our body will, the muscles will kind of like mob up the extra sugar into the bloodstream. And then we'll kind of see more of a steady effect afterwards. But it is a very, very different response in comparison to like steady state cardiovascular or walking or lifting in general.
Okay, yeah, that's a very good point. And I was exactly thinking about the time. Actually, I could just visualize the scene when we were doing the workout for the WOW program, and I had my CGN, and I'm thinking, why is my blood sugar increasing? And you did ask me later on, did it stabilize later on? And that's good to know because a lot of people will freak out, like they're doing the HIIT training, wearing a CGM, what's happening to my blood sugar? And that's why we have you, where they get like one-on-one session to look at their data and the kind of exercise that they're doing, so you can evaluate them. So I think that's a very important thing for people to know. The kind of exercise will what they do will decide how their blood sugar is behaving
Mm-hmm.
all over, the throughout the day. So that's
Yeah,
that's mhm.
100%.
Because
And
and the timings, does it matter like what time they work
so
out?
that can have an effect on blood glucose. So
Mm-hmm.
whether you're training in the morning where you might naturally have a little bit more of a cortisol spike first thing in the morning, which is part of our circadian rhythm, so you might see more of that kind of, depending if you're eating or not before the workout too, you might see a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more of a different glucose response versus later in the day that maybe you've eaten over the course of the day. Our glycogen stores are topped up a little bit more. We won't maybe see that volatility that we might see first thing in the morning.
Okay. Yeah. So cortisol does play a role. So I also, it's a little off topic, but when I was when I had my CGM, my actually my blood sugar will go up with stress. So if I'm getting anxious about something getting late for someone, my blood sugar will rise. That was something too. So that's why the CGMs are great in terms of understanding your own body because
Mm-hmm.
and is it true like my body can react differently to the same exercise that you would do.
Yeah, 100%. Because it really
Okay.
depends on, there's a few variables there. So it depends on like how much muscle mass each of us has. Like that would play a factor in terms of the blood glucose response. And also depends
Mhm.
how trained you are, like how used to your body is to a certain type of exercise. So say, for example, like my blood glucose would respond very, very different than my husband's blood glucose response. He primarily does strength work. So he's got a lot of muscle mass on him versus I don't have as much muscle mass as him. I still do strength training and everything like that, but we're just different. And like even in terms of like the type of movement we do on a regular basis, I do a lot more like more of the cardiovascular stuff for triathlon training and endurance work. So my blood glucose has a tendency to go down quite a bit.
Mhm.
Versus we've looked at this, and it's like sometimes during workouts we do like a CrossFit workout together. His blood glucose will come up and then will dip back down, and he'll go down blood sugar after the workout. Versus I don't necessarily have the
Oh.
same volatility during the workout. But for him, because he has so much muscle mass, his body's storing so much more glycogen, his liver's storing more. And so his body, midway through the workout, is dumping more energy into his bloodstream to help fuel the muscles
Mhm.
that are working.
That's a good point. So that brings out, another interesting point. Like there are some people who need a pre-workout snack, and some people don't. So should we take a pre-workout snack, or should we not, or how does it work, play around?
Um, it's really dependent on the individual and it's really dependent on the type of exercise. So if you're doing something that's a little bit more lower intensity, something that's like a walk, easy cardiovascular in the morning, fasted, I wouldn't worry too much about having a snack if you aren't necessarily hungry. And a lot of times you have to just monitor your blood glucose because for some individuals, what you might find is you do something first thing in the morning and your blood glucose dips quite a bit. And then you
Mm-hmm.
might find that you feel shaky or you don't feel great. And I would say in those situations, make sure you have a pre workout snack or make sure you have some sort of snack first thing in the morning. Because for some people, you know what? I wake up really hungry every single morning. And so I know for me, even if I'm going for a light walk, I need something in my body or I will go hypoglycemic on the walk. And it's not a good thing. But for others, maybe they don't necessarily have the same situation. And for some people, their blood glucose in the morning, depending on their health status, might be a little bit higher. So sometimes even going for a little bit of a walk first thing in the morning to stabilize the blood sugars before they start their day and eating might actually help with them later in the day. I would say, depending on what you're doing, like if you're doing something that's a little bit higher intensity first thing in the morning, I would suggest making sure you have some fuel before. Because even though, like, where the high intensity will help with the glucose response afterwards, you might actually have more of a cortisol response if you don't have that food before. And so that we know that's going to cause more volatility in the blood sugars. So having a small snack before that high intensity exercise first thing in the morning might really help kind of stabilize things that you might still get a little bit of a dip up
Mm-hmm.
and then it'll come back down, but you'll have less volatility even after the fact.
Right, right. So basically, when we have our body is physically stressed, we release more cortisol, and cortisol is making our blood sugar go high. And that is a whole
Mm-hmm.
different topic on stress that we talk about later. But that is something we can see on CGM, right?
Yeah,
So we can
100%.
see the trends of your blood sugar while you're exercising, whether it's empty stomach, the whole data. If somebody puts it correctly, I think it's
Yeah,
very helpful.
I think it's 100% helpful. And that's why I almost say, like, when you start to use your CGM, almost see it as a little bit of trial and error to figure out what works for your body and to figure out what gives you the response that you're looking for, too. Like, maybe you try to do some fasted walks in the morning to see how you feel. You see what that
Mm-hmm.
blood sugar data does. Maybe you try to have a small, like, even if it's a higher protein snack first thing in the morning to see how that
Mm-hmm.
does with your blood glucose. If you find that does better for you, I find kind of like that little bit of trial and error and kind of approaching it to figure out what is almost like the best mindset to go into it as well.
Right, right, right. And also, like, I think it's a real-time data, and that's why we call ourselves, data-driven dietitians,
Mm-hmm.
because when we see the data, we can actually exactly help you in terms of how you should exercise, what you should exercise, when you should exercise. And with our Metabolism Marathon program, you have great, workout routines that we have put together in the program, inside the program. So when somebody is coming in, we can exactly tell them which one is beneficial for them once we go through their data,
Yeah,
right?
100%.
So this is great. So also we talked about the fasted and fueled workout. We talked about like sitting versus walking after the meal, how walking after the meal can help the blood sugar. So, but in general, as a whole, like in terms of physical activity, I know there are different people do different kinds of exercises. Some people like yoga, some people like dancing, some people like walking, some people like strength training. S- um Overall, what are, like, at least, like, give me one or two simple takeaways for our listeners to apply right away. So if somebody, they don't know what to do and they don't have a CGM right now, and they're not a part of the Metabolism Marathon yet, that we start kick off November 1st, what would you recommend them right now?
Mm-hmm. So, what I would recommend right now is start with a 10 or 15-minute walk after your largest meal of the day. So, maybe that's your lunch, maybe that's your dinner, but that alone can really help to smooth out the curve. And even if we can see, like, say, for example, if your dinner is your largest meal, having like a short walk afterwards can really even help blood glucose over nighttime too. So, it can help you sleep, which can have a domino effect on many different elements of your life. So, that's a really easy kind of like first thing that we can start even today. And then the other thing would be consider adding some resistance training and from a movement standpoint. So we know that the more muscle we have, the more of that sponge we're going to have. So even adding resistance in once or twice a week can have a huge benefit. And that can be body weight. It doesn't have to be a huge like dumbbells, things like that. Body weight bands work great. And this is going to help with longer term blood glucose management. You don't need
Absolutely.
extremes. You really
I
don't need
know.
extremes.
That's what I have learned from you while we were in the WOW program when you were teaching about that you really don't need heavy things to do strength training. You were making us use bottles or your own body
Mm-hmm.
weight and things like that. And so many people have vouched for like how they have changed their body composition. They look leaner. So
Yeah.
that yeah, they look leaner and they were so happy about it. So I am honestly I'm so excited about this 30-day run with Metabolism Marathon. And I'm so glad that you are on board with us in terms of teaching people what to exercise and how to exercise and when to exercise, because that's a very key piece of the puzzle. So, we talk about in our Metabolism Marathon program, we talk about movement, we talk about food, we talk about stress, we talk about sleep. Gut health and inflammation by far is my favorite topic, but we talk a little bit about that in that it's more for the WOW program. But this program can definitely help people balance their blood sugars, that can improve their metabolic health. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And that's what we're looking
Right.
for is that metabolic health for the long term and the bigger picture of it.
Absolutely. And I'm going to put the link below in the video down here so you can see what is your metabolic type, whether you are a glucose crasher, whether you're a cortisol burner, or you're an inflammation trapper, or you're a sleep deprived metabolizer. So make sure you take the quiz and get the information on the program that is coming starting November 1st, but we end enrolling people by October 25th or so because we only have limited seating as a part of the Beetle launch and we want to make sure we ship their CGMs. So,
Mm-hmm.
well, thank you so much, Alicia,
Yes.
for coming
And
and
thank
we
you for
look
having
forward.
me.
Absolutely, always. And every time you are here, we learn so much. And thank you for helping all my clients getting into shape. So, all
One
right,
person at a time. Have a
one
good
person
one.
at a time. Have a good one. Bye bye.